Hi there, welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Cantan.
And I'm Dave Higgins.
And this week we're going to be talking about how to get ideas. But that's our discussion topic in a little while. But first we're going to go into what we did this week. Do you want to go first, Dave, or I can?
I'll go first. You went first last time, so I'll go first this time.
But that's our discussion topic in this one.
I seem to be getting an echo. With me. I think let's fix the echo. Okay. Yeah. Right. Well, this week I've been doing another episode of Seven Stones, my Swords and Sorcery serial that's turning into a Swords and Sorcery epic serial. It's on episode 54 now. That's been going for over a year. Also, as I mentioned last week, I'm considering releasing something under a pseudonym. So I've been outlining that and starting work on the initial bits of setting up the pseudonym. So new email address, new this, that, and the other. So I've got it all there ready to go for when I get the book ready. What else have I been doing? That I think has mostly been it for this week.
Cool. This week I've had another hectic week where Heidi injured herself last Sunday, so she's been on crutches, and then work just exploded. Like I was just snowed under, so I didn't get too much done. But I got paperbacks for Violent Science in the post, which look pretty cool. And that's the back side. So I kind of have a technique for doing covers now that seems to work pretty well. When I do them myself, obviously I try and get custom if I can. What else? I did 30k, so I'm up to 30k in Adventure now, which is the book we're writing together. So I got about 6.5, 7k this week. It was only about 3.5 last week. And I've been doing Facebook ads, which have been going very well so far. I was thinking I would share the latest one. If I can find it here. I'll just share the whole screen. So this is the latest ad I've been putting up on Facebook, which was a copy of Michael Anderley's. He had a very, very similar ad that he used. He was on the AuthorBiz podcast this week, and he only started publishing in November, and he's now for January, he'll get about 13k from KDP. Because as usual, he's a marketing expert. When a marketing expert writes books, then they do extremely well because they're so good at marketing them. So I copied that ad. So I have my old ad, which is just the front cover of the first book. And I have that new ad, which is kind of a copy of that kind of ad. And the sales have been going up steadily on Amazon, including 3 paperback sales, which is pretty cool, of the Bitter End Fantasy collection, because I don't usually sell very many paperbacks. And yeah, so that's going well. And it seems to me that changing the ads gets me more results just based on people who have already seen the ad seeing another slightly different ad. I don't know if that's a kind of a gut feeling. It's not anything scientific, but it seems like the people who are sharing and liking it say, oh, I picked up book 1 and then I'm really enjoying it. Like they write on the ad post. So it seems like they're kind of then sharing it on to their friends. And as everyone knows, like the best word of mouth is the best recommendation. So when they're sharing to their friends saying, I really enjoyed this series, then anyone else who likes fantasy starts reading it too. And the ad is for the Bite Collection, which is the whole series, and sales of all my books are going up, even on unrelated different series. Which seems like people might click through and go, oh, I don't like this fantasy stuff, but let's see what else he writes. Or people have read all the fantasy books and then say, oh yeah, I remember that author. Maybe I'll go and see what else he has and buy other stuff. So that seems to be going well. I'm spending about $6 a day. And yeah, it's leading to some results.
Yay.
So that's good. So we can go on to our topic for today, which is ideas and how to get ideas. Before we do, actually, I wanted to give a shout out to Steve Turnbull, who was our first ever commenter on the last video, and Colin Moby, who was our first ever emailer, who emailed us with quite a lot of questions for different topics. We're going through the process of writing for at least the first 7 to 10 episodes are going to be different stages of writing. So he's got different questions. So we're going to answer them as we go. So there was none for the idea section. So we'll answer the first one next time, probably. So ideas. I thought there was two basic kind of types of ideas, which are, the first is ideas for stories themselves, like a kind of a, I want to write a story about John McClane or Die Hard kind of thing, or whatever it happens to be. And the other is ideas for twists and turns in stories and things like that, like general, like smaller ideas that fit inside a story. So for me personally, the best ideas I have are usually from long walks. When I go out for a long walk, I usually, if I'm trying to have story ideas, I don't have any music or any podcasts or anything. I just have my own thoughts to kind of listen to, which helps. And then I go for an hour's walk or so, and I tend to have a few ideas on the way. How about you, Dave?
I get ideas while on walks, and I get ideas while I'm in the shower. And for me, it's some sort of disjunction from the process of writing, some sort of change. As I get very few ideas sitting at my desk of any kind. But if sort of I've hit, I really don't know what's going to happen next. And that happens more when you're writing a weekly serial than when you're writing a novel, because you've got to come up with new ideas every single week. If I walk to the shops or have a shower or go and polish the dining room table or whatever, because my brain is now consciously working on a different task, I get all of these things chunking together in my unconscious, and I usually get an idea to fix whatever I'm doing, or an idea for an entirely different story that I could be writing instead.
I mean, that certainly happens. I have hundreds of ideas written down for other stories.
Well, yeah, I used to carry a notebook with me everywhere and religiously write down every single idea I had. But I was churning out page after page after page of ideas, and I realized I wasn't actually getting to them because I was coming up with new ideas faster than actually I could write books. So for some of them, like a character who's this, you can work it in. But if you come up with 2 or 3 different societies on your walk to and from the shops, you're not realistically going to be writing 2 or 3 books that week. So I gave up noting them all down because I wasn't ever going back to the ideas documents. So sometimes I'll have an idea, think that's great, forget about it, and then 3 days later I'll think, actually, that would fit. So and for me, there's a difference between having the ideas and using the ideas. So I sort of like going on constantly having ideas because they stick in my brain. And sometimes 2 ideas that I had weeks ago will stick together and come out as the answer to something else I need to do. So, and for me, first step in having ideas is to not sit there trying to have ideas, because
Oh yeah, I mean that's the worst thing to do, I think. I note everything down, and I still do, and that's because my memory is spotty sometimes, and I'll have a really good idea, even for the story I'm currently working on. Like, oh, the next twist should be this, and if I don't write it down, when I come to sit at the keyboard, I'll go, "What was that again?" And it's gone, and it'll, it might resurface a few days later, but chances are it's gone for good. So I do, again, it's down to being different. Like everyone's different. Because I won't remember things, I write everything down. The same as I have a task list for everything I'm going to do in Asana, because I'll just forget that I'm going to do something, even if it's something that's relatively important. It'll slip my mind, and then a week later I'll go, oh, I was meant to do that, and it might be something where it's sending something out to subscribers or whatever it happens to be, which was kind of important. And the other thing is, I think writing it down as well reinforces. It's kind of like, for me at least, like a Pavlov's bell kind of thing, where it's a reward, basically saying, yes, that was a good thing, brain. Keep doing those. So yeah, so it's kind of like a, yes, that's exactly what you're meant to be doing, kind of thing, like checking off a checkbox. So I was going to mention another thing I do, which worked. I have only started doing it the last couple of books, but that's write down. So sit at the desk when I'm stuck and write down everything that can happen next. That's stupid. That's been done a million times before. And then go for the walk after I've gotten rid of all the stupid ideas and already written them down. Because then they're out of the way. The first 10 ideas of things that I've seen a million times before anyway, that I go, okay, well, they're not going to work. And then when I get to my walk, I'm kind of, okay, well, I've gone through all those, so I don't need to think about those. I can think about whatever else might happen, which seems to work as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if processing the silly ideas like that is you put a spin on that, maybe, and come up with the most ridiculously silly or overused thing, and then use that as the seed, deliberately use that as the seed for something else. So rather than rejecting it, try to do something you haven't encountered before.
I mean, someone had that about write down the most hackneyed premise for a book possible. So I then said, okay, well, it should be Romeo and Juliet, because that's been done a billion times before. One of them should be a vampire, but he's sworn off blood. And the other should be a princess, and she's the princess of some fantasy planet, and he's a vampire who's sworn off blood, and they're from two different families that are at each other's throats almost literally. And that then ended up as being something where you could see that book happening. Like, that sounds hackneyed, but you put enough hackneyed ideas together and you end up with something that actually isn't that unoriginal. So let's see what else. I'm going to consult my notes, as I say. If I don't write things down, I don't remember. So yeah, I write ideas down, even if they're trite or boring, because I just think that's quite useful. Also, for me, another way I have ideas is naps. If you go and sleep when you're not really, really tired, then you tend to wake up whilst you're in the middle of REM sleep, or at least I do. And if you wake up while you're in REM sleep, then you remember whatever you were dreaming. Again, personally, I do, at least. And sometimes it's stupid stuff that you dream, stupid stuff that's completely useless. But sometimes you dream something where you go, actually, that's quite an interesting idea for a society or a character or a story or whatever it happens to be. So that's worked for me sometimes as well. The other thing I do, of course, is combine ideas. So if I've written I have like hundreds of different things written down in my Scrivener document. That's all the ideas. Quite often, if I read through it and then I'll go, oh, well, if I combine that with that, that makes something interesting. Let's see. And of course, taking from other things that you enjoy is a good thing to do too. Like if you're watching Game of Thrones, for instance, I was watching Game of Thrones and I went, well, I'd like to take the same kind of thing, which I have in a lot of my stories now, where Game of Thrones' unique thing about it is that anyone can die. That there isn't the same rules that a hero can get shot with an arrow, but it's fine, he'll recover. No, it might get infected and he'll just die. Which you want to a certain extent. So what you don't want is your main character dying halfway through your book, because that's not going to be very good. Usually. If you're George R. R. Martin, it'll be good, but if you're anyone else, it might not be. So I've had characters who I would not have had die before watching Game of Thrones that I have had die in, certainly in Bitter End. And characters who would end up together otherwise, or would have, did not, because it didn't seem like they had that kind of romantic relationship, so why force it in? So there's going back, there's two types of ideas, essentially. There's ideas for books, which you tend to have just at random times, as you were saying, Dave, and a lot of them. I think as well, it's kind of like weight training, that once you start telling your brain that that's something you're looking for, you're looking for ideas, then your brain starts working on it. And at the start, it'll be only a few of them, not very often, and maybe they're not very good. But as you keep rewarding your brain and keep saying, this is something I'm looking for, even write down any hackneyed idea and say, yes, this is good, keep doing this, then you start having better and more interesting ideas, I think. How about you, Dave? Anything to add there?
Well, I thought you can, as well as rewarding your brain for the good ideas, and there are ways, if you really are stuck, I found that I can sometimes trigger ideas. There's an old rule about identifying whether or not something's in passive voice, saying, can you add by zombies to it? So the room was emptied by zombies, so it's in the passive voice. But you can do the same sort of trick with ideas. So if you go out for a walk and to clear your brain so you can get ideas because you've been staring at the screen and they're not coming, just pick something utterly absurd, like zombies or robots or aliens or superheroes or whatever. And then the next thing that catches your attention, just come up with how whatever the thing you picked was could have been the cause of that. So you've picked by zombies, and then you turn around the corner and you notice a football in the gutter. It's like, well, a football in the gutter isn't really an interesting idea, but if you tell your brain, okay, well, how could a football get in the gutter and there be zombies involved? Okay, well, zombies playing football. So why would zombies be playing football? Because two voodoo sorcerers had a dispute and they didn't want to cause mass carnage, so they've arranged a football match between zombies. And it's a stupid idea, but it's knocked you utterly out of where you were. It started your brain thinking of ideas again. And it gets you an idea, and maybe that isn't the idea you need. Maybe, well, I like that enough to write it down for later because it's not what I need, but I might want it later, or that's really stupid, it's not going anywhere. But if you take it far enough that actually you've got a vague idea for something out of it, it's convinced your brain that what it should be doing is spotting things and going, well, okay, how does that thing I'm seeing relate to this totally other thing?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, like, I could see that scene very easily. A football match between zombies. I'm thinking, you know, in Father Ted, where they have the over 80s, whatever it was, football match or whatever it was. Something similar to that.
Yeah, and it's there's not a complete story there. I mean, there might be a short story in that. There's not. But
that leads you on to then. So we're kind of brainstorming an idea now. So if you did instead of Father Ted, which was about Catholic priests, if you did voodoo priests on an island who had a rival voodoo priest island, then you've got something that's very inspired by Father Ted, but then you can have silly things like zombies having a football match. That could almost be a Father Ted spoof, but then hopefully you'd have enough ideas to kind of distinguish it.
Yeah, so there you go. There's us coming up with an idea live on air. So
that brings us very tidily on to another way to have ideas, which is brainstorming. Which we did for a while. We had a brainstorming group, but it was very difficult for everyone to meet up at the same time every week, which tends to be the trouble with any of these kind of things, with having a mastermind group or a brainstorming group. But it was incredibly useful, because if you have 4 or 5 people who are all authors talking, even if it's they write in a different genre, they're all creative people, and they'll all come up with a creative idea, and they'll all try and better the idea that's already out there. So someone will say voodoo Father Ted, and then someone else will go, okay, so what would be the next idea what would be the +1 on that? How would you +1 a voodoo Father Ted to make it even more interesting?
Could you play it utterly seriously? So, Father Ted is played for laughs, but could you do voodoo Father Ted as horror? Would you be able to do it without the comedy?
Yeah, I mean, then you're kind of getting into how ridiculous can you get without being a comedy when you're dealing with horror. Because you can certainly be funny when you're being ridiculous with horror, like the Evil Dead series of movies, or pretty much a lot of Sam Raimi stuff that's not big Hollywood movies. So yeah, that would be quite challenging, I think, to be completely serious when you're having a zombie football match. You would have to have quite heavy stakes, I think. There would have to be something very drastic at stake, which meant that then people were taking it seriously. So the voodoo priests, I think you'd have to establish early on that the other island were vicious and would kill people close to that voodoo priest hero character. And then the voodoo priest hero character's best friend is on the line, or whatever it happens to be. So yeah, again, that's brainstorming and +1ing ideas, because then you see, with just the two of us, we're both, as authors, trying to create stuff the whole time and trying to go, okay, well, what could be the next step? The other thing I was going to mention that I haven't used personally, but I have tried a couple of times, is meditation. And I always want to do meditation, both to reduce stress and to just kind of let your brain relax a bit. But it's so difficult to find the time to do it. It's meant to be twice a day for 15 minutes is kind of the minimum. I was watching a Udemy course on it. And when I've done it, it's been very useful for ideas because you're trying to think of nothing, which is when your brain starts coming up with completely wacky, weird stuff. Which at least in speculative fiction tends to be the best. That's what you want. You want the weird and wacky stuff. If you're writing crime or general fiction or something like that, perhaps you don't want spaceships made out of dragons or something. But for us, that can be quite useful. Yeah, and the other thing, of course, is inspiration from the bad stuff. So Game of Thrones is a very good series that I've taken inspiration from. But you can also watch terrible stuff. I'm hearing an echo. Is that... No, it doesn't matter. You can watch terrible stuff and then go, well, I'll make sure not to do that. So if you're paying attention, then it can be quite useful. So yeah, was there anything else on ideas? Or
well, as a sort of counterpoint to your saying you can watch stuff you think is really terrible, there's also the fact that the ideas don't have to be good. It's something that's probably going to come up a lot in later podcasts as well, because it runs through my entire process, and I suspect potentially yours, is that each stage in the writing process is improving something that exists. Because no matter how bad something is, you can improve it later. But until you've got an idea, you can't improve it. So if the only thing you can come up with is just blatantly stealing Raymond Chandler's "if you ever get stuck, have two people coming with guns." So in the middle of your period fiction, you've got the Tea Party, you just can't think of where to go next. So suddenly two people run in with flintlocks, and it's at least it's an idea to get you moving. You can always, if you don't like the idea because it doesn't seem perfect, then you don't have to stick with that idea in every single draft. You can fix it later. So sometimes there are ideas that are great for, this is the book I want to write next, or this is going to take the story somewhere I'd really love to go. But also sometimes all you need is an idea to get you past, I really don't know where to go next. And so if you get into the mindset of, it doesn't have to be the perfect idea, it just has to be a good enough idea to get you to a bit where you are writing again, then you just stick a half-formed idea in and go back later and fix it, because you've always got the opportunity in the next draft or in the outline or in the snowflake or whatever to change it. And once you've got the idea written down, your brain knows that's something to start thinking about. So your unconscious will start churning away at it while you're doing the washing up, while you're having a nap, while you're cleaning your teeth or whatever. So when you come back for that outline, first draft or whatever, your unconscious might have straightened out which bit of the idea is good and which bit of the idea isn't, and come up with ways to make it better.
I mean, that's a very good point, because there was a scientific study recently where they said that if you are expecting something to be perfect, like if you're working on something and it's you think it's going to be the best thing in the world, best book that's ever been written, #1 on all the charts and so on, you will perform worse than if you think of something as being a learning experience. So if you think, okay, I'm getting a very terrible echo. Are you hearing that, Dave?
I'm not on this end, no.
As long as it's just me, as long as it's not the video. So anyway, sorry. So if you're thinking that this is just a step on the road to getting to be a good author, then you'll do a better job because you won't be paralyzed with the expectation that everything has to be an amazing idea.
Yeah.
And the other thing, as you said, was that you can always improve it later. And even I read a book recently called The Story Grid, where he takes books that are already written that someone would consider publishing otherwise, and then says, okay, well, you need to rip this bit out and get rid of this character and make that, that match into this bit later. So there's a kind of a setup and that kind of thing. Until something's actually published for the first time, it's completely malleable. It's once you've published it that you're kind of stuck because, like The Bite on the Line, the first thing I published, I can't go back and restructure the whole thing. Potentially because it might have knock-on effects to all the rest of the series, but also because plenty of readers have read that. And I've heard from readers that they've reread the books. And you can imagine if it'd be a kind of a George Lucas Star Wars thing, if I rewrote the first book and they went back to read it again and it was different, they might not be very happy.
Yeah.
Even if I might think it's better. Oh, and the Raymond Chandler thing as well was interesting because I took that too literally with the first book I ever wrote. First novel I ever finished was about a pathologist, and it was a kind of a crime thing. And it was called The Pathological Runner. And I literally had people walk into the room with guns every time I got stuck because I was pantsing it. I didn't write an outline. So it was just, he was constantly going places and then, oh, here's some more bad guys with guns. Who are they? Don't know. Some more bad guys with guns, so he has to run again. So yeah, that's an atrocious book. That's why it's not published and never will be.
Yeah. It's okay to have ideas that don't quite work. But,
well, it was good experience because it taught me that I could finish a book. I could get to the end of 60, 70,000 words.
that's a great moment where you actually got your first complete draft. Even if you look at it and it's terrible, it's something that the majority of people never get to.
The trouble was, I wrote this, I guess it was in the 90s, late 90s or early 2000s, and this was before I'd gotten into all these writing groups and things like that, to know that there was an alternative to pantsing. So I then wrote another 2 books after that were both terrible as well. They got slightly better, but they were still terrible. And then got discouraged because I was like, well, this doesn't work. Like, I don't seem to be able to write something that's worthy of being published. Which is a completely different frame of mind now because there's so many podcasts, so much sharing of knowledge that you can kind of see, okay, I do this, then I do this stage, and then at this stage. And I mean, for me, at least, I'm a very kind of structured, I like a structured sequence of events you can go through in order to be a finished book that makes sense.
I think if you've got the structure there, you can always decide to throw it out. Whereas if you haven't got the structure, then you can't suddenly have structure if you need it. So having something to start off with, so you can go later, well, at this particular moment, that isn't perfect for me, so I'll do something else, is always giving you options. It's always having the options to just go with what you've got. Gives you a safety net. So then you can go with a wild flight of fantasy, and if it doesn't work, you know, well, I've got something that works. It might not be great, but it works. So I can go back to that and know where to go.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've had criticisms where it's gone, people have said, oh, this is kind of predictable. Like, for instance, Planet Zero, the aliens are kind of bug creatures, and people have gone, well, that's Starship Troopers and probably a million other sci-fi things, but the structure of it works, even if that's not the most imaginative idea ever. People have read it and enjoyed it because they're going, well, the rest of the book works. This is just a very boring idea. If you have just a sequence of boring ideas, that's not going to be very good, but one weak link in a chain is not something that you should then worry about the whole book and not working, because it can work in every other way.
Exactly. And West Side Story is Romeo and Juliet, but West Side Story is also ridiculously popular. So you can have an idea that's derivative. I mean, anyone who's read Romeo and Juliet starts watching West Side Story for the first time, they've got a strong idea of where it's going to go. But it's the things that are different about it that are good. So as long as you put your own spin on it, it doesn't matter if bits of it are, well, that's similar to something else.
Oh, Sons of Anarchy as well is one of the most popular shows on TV, and that's just Hamlet.
Yeah.
And I think it works extremely well as Hamlet, as an adaptation of Hamlet, in a modern setting. So, I mean, there's no reason. If you were completely stuck, go back to Shakespeare, and you can't really go wrong. I mean, there's a reason they're still talking about the guy 600 years later or whatever it is. If you took one of his, there's certainly some plays that are maybe not as well structured as Hamlet and Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet, but if you take one of his plays that maybe has not been used as much but is well structured, and put it in any setting, putting it in a sci-fi setting or a crime setting or whatever it happens to be, you'll certainly come up with something that people will enjoy in a structural sense. Obviously, you have to have a lot of other stuff in there, but it'll work at least. Grant, was there anything else you wanted to add, Dave?
Don't think so. No, I'm not out of ideas, but I think we've covered how to get those ideas.
Mm. Oh, the other thing, very briefly, I'll mention as well is feel free to have ideas about your process as well, which I'm constantly doing. So, for example, a year ago, I thought, I used to write scripts, movie scripts. So, would it be better if I wrote a script version of the story first and then wrote the novel version? Because then I've got all the dialogue done and I can improve the dialogue and then fill in all the descriptions and the character actions and things like that. And that didn't work at all. So it wasted quite a lot of time, but it was an idea about a process that then said, no, okay, I was doing it better the way I was. But the next idea I had was to break the story down on the editing stage, and that has worked very well. So, so you can have ideas not just about the contents of the story, but also the way you're writing it as well. So then we'll probably wrap up there unless there's anything else.
Don't think so, no.
You can catch Dave on his Curious Mind website, davidjhiggins.wordpress.com. Is that right?
That's me.
And I'm at simoncantan.com. And we're on Twitter and Facebook and all the rest of it, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for watching. And next week we'll be back with an episode on outlining.
Bye for now.
Bye.